It is amazing to see such a turnout of people who had the pleasure of knowing Dad. I know we all miss Dad in different ways and for different reasons. My biggest struggle with not having Dad around anymore is wanting to share things with him and not being able to. I want to text him a funny joke or ask him what band made a certain song.
Bless your heart, it's okay.
Or share with him a funny scene from a movie. I miss being able to do these things, but Dad's absence makes me miss one thing above all others, and that is family gatherings with him. Perhaps you all are expecting me now to tell you a warm, fond family memory, but the truth is our gatherings with Dad were enjoyable because when you put us siblings in a room together with Dad, we began to tease him about basically anything. An action, a mannerism, something he said, and Dad always took our playful jabs in stride. He never seemed to get offended. He might roll his eyes, but he would always simultaneously crack a smile, and occasionally he would even laugh at himself right along with us. Well, Dad is not here with us physically, but my hope is that he is smiling down at us right now, and I see no reason why we can't continue to poke a little fun at him, still. And so, here's a brief partial list of things we harass Dad about. So, if this resonates with anybody, raise your hand. Number 1, his odd eating behaviors. This includes, but is not limited to, eating the gristle off of chicken and rib bones, eating shrimp tails with the shells, and eating entire lemon wedges, rinds included, with or without a dash of salt. Any hands on that one? No? Number 2, wearing lederhosen at basically any occasion from Oktoberfest celebrations to Tuesdays, despite protests from his children. Number 3, raising his index finger to summon waiters at restaurants. Number 4, a sneeze so loud it could crack your home's foundation. Number 5, the akshish, which was more of a aksh. It was the sound equivalent of rolling your eyes. Number 6, spending hours preparing for and recording family events, then never letting footage see the light of day. Number 7, his and Richard's walk across America. And I'll do a bonus number 8, which is a Larry story as well, which was his meticulous wrapping of cords on any equipment at all. And when Troy and I moved, we had an apartment, we were moving down the street to a house, and my dad was there to help us move things, which we were thinking, like, heavy stuff. Couches, for example. And at one point we realized that we hadn't seen my dad in a while, and we were out putting things into the moving truck, so I came in the house, and I saw my dad sitting on the floor, wrapping a cord to a VCR, and I said, "What are you doing, Dad?" He said, "Doing what I do best, wrapping cords." Dad was quirky, goofy, and occasionally embarrassing, but he was always 100% unapologetically himself, and I will always admire him for that. I invite you all to raise your glass to Dad. Here's to a guy who was truly one of a kind.
Hello, I'm Donna Isaac. Thanks for coming out today on this very cold day. I flew in from Minnesota, so actually it doesn't feel too bad. It feels kind of balmy actually for me. So I'm Kathy's sister. Kathy asked me to read a piece of Desiderata. You might remember that as being the kind of hippie manifesto, the long poem, beautiful poem. But she wanted me to read the end of that. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees and the stars. You have a right to be here. And whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should. Therefore, Be at peace with God, whatever you conceive him to be. And whatever your labors and aspirations, in the noisy confusion of life, keep peace in your soul. With all its sham, drudgery, and broken dreams, it is still a beautiful world. Be cheerful. I think Larry would agree with that. Strive to be happy. I also write poetry, and Kathy asked me to write a elegy, and I kept thinking, she said that when I talked to her on the phone that it was really quiet around the house, and since Larry was such a sound guy as well as the audio-visual, visual and sound, I kept thinking of the sounds that Larry would make when I was around him. Sometimes we would visit, my husband and I, and Kathy and Larry would blow up a blow-up bed in the front room, and Larry had to get up early in the morning to work, and I remember the sounds then more than anything. He just was very meticulous about things, and it was like he would stir things 3 times, and everything was sort of, I don't know, it seemed like he was just meticulous is the best word I can say. So I started thinking about all the different sounds of Larry, and I wrote a poem called Sounds, and it's also in the program. A sneeze startled the old dog, hard of hearing, but so was Larry, after once sitting too close to an amplifier at a rock concert. Or a throat clearing, spoon clanking, plate scraping. So we always knew he was present, enjoying iced tea, pizza, or any of his wife's delectable meals. Once in a while, a chuckle or an outright laugh at an internet meme or a political gaffe. After all, there was irony in the air, game shows on TV to be savored. Jokes to be savored. And I put a joke in there I was going to tell Larry. Why did the cannibals refuse to eat the clowns? Tastes funny. Up for adventure, a little boy gleam in his eye, sipping wine at Wolf Trap, foot tapping at Jiffy Lube, which I love that name, road trips and sushi bars. He liked to share bags of black licorice, the latest gizmos, Garmin's, old movies, roller coasters. He told stories, took historical tours, say in Ireland, in Shanksville, the Shoney's Big Boy Museum, look it up, a haunted walk on the streets of New Orleans. We knew he was there when we heard a camera whir, recording his loved ones for posterity, though we ducked and held up our hands in protest, but gushed over the finished products, asking for copies. In still moments, there was silent pride at his children's weddings, graduations, reading every movie credit in the quiet theater, the smooth slink of his Tesla, a goodbye smile and hug. We'll miss the sounds of his presence and wonder why we couldn't have had them longer, though we may have jumped at the sneeze, gasped at the guffaw, marveled at the computer keys clacking. In the reverential silence at the end of the day, we'll look to the winking sun over the ocean, over a mountain of blue, and listen for Larry's laugh carried away on the wind. Thank you.
I'm Steve. I'm my dad's eldest son. My mom took some of my bits there, so you have to forgive my speech here. Anyway, there's a couple things that you knew when you saw my dad coming towards you. One, you were in for a long and detailed story. And two, after the conversation, you know about your plumber's sister's childhood friend who my dad went to college with, essentially the 6 degrees of Larry Aronson. There are many things I remember about my dad, but one story, however, comes to mind. On several occasions as a kid, my dad would ask me, Steve, do you want to go for a ride? Inevitably, this question would come right as I was making an assault on an enemy armada, or about to beat the final boss of some game. See, in those days, there's no way to save your progress in a video game. Nevertheless, some small glimmer of hope in my child's mind would envision a Dairy Queen Blizzard or a new video game in my near future. So, like the naive child I was, I acquiesced and agreed to go for a ride. Where would the tan 84 Camry take us? There were endless possibilities. However, these possibilities quickly dwindled as we arrive at a computer parts store, a hardware store, or some automotive facility, all of which my 8-year-old self had no interest in. On this particular occasion, we arrived at a plain, nondescript building. It didn't tick any of the above boxes, so it might be something fun. However, I found out over the next 3 hours anything but. Inside was a plain linoleum floor, a set of metal folding chairs in a semicircle. It was here that I would be forced to endure a videographer's meeting for 3 hours. 3 hours to an 8-year-old might as well be 3 days to an adult. So I sat there in the most uncomfortable chairs as men 6 times my age rambled about the latest XR500 camera or the newest tape formatting techniques. I learned that day that there was approximately 600 lines framing the linoleum tiles, and that I would never consider a career in video production. But as horrible as that experience was, it wasn't my dad being mean to me. He generally wanted to expose me to the things he loved in hopes that it would bring as much joy to me as it did to him. This wasn't just exclusive to me, as he truly wanted to share his passions with everyone he met in hopes that they would be excited about the same topics. It didn't always work, but I honestly think he hoped it would inspire others. Now he's no longer with us, and I would give almost anything to hear him once again talk enthusiastically about a subject, any subject that was near and dear to him. He generally cared about sharing these passions with others, and in turn, cared about what others shared with him. It was a testament to his love of people interacting with him. It is exemplified by everyone's presence here today. So let's raise a glass and toast my dad and his love for people, and you all in particular.
Hello, everyone. Like Mrs. A said, my name's Dan Moore, and I'm a friend of Luke. And he couldn't be here today, but he wrote this for everybody. I'm going to miss my dad very much. Even the thought of never seeing him again seems completely hard to believe. The reality hasn't sunken in yet. Even though it's a time for myself, and usually to mourn the loss of a great guy and wonderful father, it is also a time to look back and celebrate his life. As a parent-child dynamic usually goes, I didn't always appreciate him as much as I should have when I was younger. It was only later in life that I fully understood him. It certainly takes a special kind of person to allow their 10-year-old son to take up playing the drums. And shortly thereafter buy him his first drum kit. And that's just the start of it. Being a drummer in a band means that most all practices would be held in his basement. And he didn't mind this. In fact, he fully supported it. The only caveat to this is that all band members would inevitably be asked the same question. Have you ever heard of Happy the Man? Not being privy to this 70 era's prog rock, their answers would undoubtedly be the same each time. No, I have not. Well, that's just unacceptable. Come down to my basement, I'll fire up some sweet jams for you. And all of my bandmates would respectively sit and listen to the odd-metered, acquired taste melodies through the speaker at several decibels over the threshold of the human ear should be subjected to. Dad would tap his knees with his fingers and bob his head as Stumpy Meets the Firecracker in Stencil Forest transitioned to the knee-bitten nymphs in limbo. I would eventually have to pull my bandmates away to get them into practice room before I had lost another half hour of my rehearsal time. I suppose it's an even trade since he had no choice but to listen to death metal screaming vocals for the following couple of hours. And he never complained. My dad was 100% full in support of my passion for the drums and for music in general. He came to nearly every performance I had ever given, from marching in the high school band to the big stages to the tiny dive bars. He was almost always there. My appreciation for him and his support goes beyond what my words can convey. I'm sure at this point I may be rehashing some Larry stories, so I'll be brief. Of course, the most famous and widely known of them is the Great Walkabout of 2013. Since my dad's way of preparing to hike across the country was focused on loading up his iPad with hours of movies, as opposed to acclimating his body to traversing treacherous landscape, I believe the whole thing was going to be a feat beyond his abilities. The most humorous anecdote above all is when he came home from the outdoor store REI, explaining that the salesman who had sold him his new shoes had him believing that he would get into hiking shape while simply hiking across the United States. No training necessary. But if it was course, all started with buying those shoes. Not to mention that my dad carried a backpack with nearly a pound of weight for every year he had been alive. Far too much. Now that he had spent a couple $1,000s on the latest and greatest equipment, it was time to begin his voyage. I, of course, had been telling all my co-workers how my dad was about to embark on quite the adventure, spending the next handful of months. We had held a big standoff with a gathering of people for him and his hiking buddy Richard. Everyone wished them well and to be safe, and he and Richard left the following day. Flash forward 3 more days. I was then told my dad injured his back and was booking a return flight home from San Francisco. Wait a second. Maybe he would benefit from seeing a doctor on the West Coast where he was and possibly continue his trek? No, he's coming home. Several days later, my boss at work asked me how my dad's hike is going, to which I reply, yeah, he's doing great. The next day, I saw my dad at a local bar first break, where one of my bands was performing. I asked how he was feeling. I never gave him crap about his misadventure. From the hiking trip, to the hardly used several $1,000 video TriCaster, to the welding tools purchased for a backyard roller coaster that was never started, to the GoPro camera that he just had to have and was ultimately used just once, being attached to my brother's dog as he roamed around. My dad was a dreamer. He was full of big ideas. Most times these ideas were more important than just the execution. But that was him. That is what made him my dad, and I love him for it. I'm sorry that I cannot be here with him today, with friends and family, but I am with my dad. As he is with me in spirit, I will think of him every day and forever miss him. I could not have asked for a better father.
The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And Brandon, when I told him about Larry's death, he wrote me a letter, if I can get through it, or at least part of it, and told me about his experiences. Now, he was quite young, but my children and their children were close in age, I think. Okay, so let me just do some highlights. Dear Dad, thought I would share a few minutes and write down a few memories and talked about on the phone. The few times Carolee, and that's my daughter, and I went over to the house after you, he was the first one I saw that I affiliated with movie equipment and gear. This, of course, is further validated with the film projects you would show Carolee and I. The ones that probably stand out the most are the two you running through the woods to obtain the Yellow Pages phone book, and the one based on the Parable of the Talents, and that was one of the two films that were mentioned in the obit, which I'm very grateful and humbled to be a part of with Larry. When we went over during the 4th of July gatherings, one point he showed us his projector that displayed The Empire Strikes Back. Well, we just heard about that, I believe, on the wall, and he was probably in the entertainment room, or his kids' game room, or at least someplace he kept his technical gear. It was pretty impressive, probably the first time Carolee and I saw what felt like a full-scale theater inside a house. Speaking of those summers, there were definitely moments full of laughs. His kids were usually very amused by the accounts that Carolee and I would share over fun times with you, including the famous incident where we were caught off guard in the entrance to the apartment at Virginia Beach. We were downstairs on the first floor there, and there was some mysterious, recording that came out from the elevator. Anyway, it said they wanted to meet us, and he was looking for a pal. I don't know what that meant, but anyway. Also, Carolee, I'm sure, will remember a time when Larry came over and we had our cats, Jerry and Lily, out and about. We found out he was allergic to cats. Is that true? Yes. I had no idea. I really didn't know that. Two other thoughts that come to mind that are indirectly involved with Larry on the 4th of July. When I was in high school, there was a brunette girl at the gathering who had sun-bronzed skin and was wearing a denim dress. I don't remember her name or what her relationship or connection was to the event, but she was probably the cutest thing I saw that entire summer. I didn't get too flirty with her, but I took as much opportunity as I could to talk with her. I was wearing an American flag bandana on my head, which fortunately must not have been a bad decision. She gave me a big smile when I shook hands saying goodbye, and I think that was an event that helped me realize I really could do fine with a girl by just being myself and not feeling about superficial concerns. So, last paragraph. Another 4th of July, I was younger, entailed Larry's dad, I remember this one, showing off a gizmo of some kind that would twist off the cap of a 2-liter bottle of soda, and then simultaneously pour the bottle just like a coffee pot. One momentous demonstration, however, took a literal turn for the worst. When the bottle slipped out of said gizmo, fell onto the floor, and as he picked it up, now faced the futile challenge of keeping the soda geyser from squirting out all the top and splashing it all over the place. You couldn't help but laugh, but they were in a convenient enough location to try and help him out. However, I was practically rolling on the ground. After the dust settled a bit or bubbles evaporated, Larry's dad managed to say, "I should have made you clean it up."
I'm Eileen, one of Larry's first cousins. His dad and my mom were siblings in a very close and loving family, so we grew up as cousins who felt somewhat like siblings ourselves. Am I holding it the right way? I don't know. The only way I'm able to speak today is because it still doesn't really seem real to me that he's gone. And, just wishing we had more time together. Larry may have been the person in my life who loved gadgets the most. For those of you who know my husband, Jeff, that's saying quite a lot. One of my earlier memories about Larry is from when the album Magical Mystery... I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Oh, okay. one of my earlier memories is when the album Magical Mystery Tour came out. I happened to be in town visiting, and Larry was still in high school living with his parents. And he had set up a musical light system in the basement of his parents' home. So when he played the record, which had just come out, all these different lights would flash in coordination with the notes being played in the album, which completely blew me away. I'd never seen anything like that, and I was very impressed. I think at the same visit, I was about 11 and he was about 17. We were supposed to go on some errand for Aunt Chris, and he was allowed to drive her Carmen Ghia sports car. And I was very excited. Coming from Detroit, it was this foreign car that seemed really cool. And we get in the car, and he peeled out of the driveway. And I was scared out of my mind the entire ride. And I don't think I've ever driven with him since that time. But I did enjoy hearing about his cross-country fuel strategies with the Tesla, which he was very proud of. For many years, Aunt Chris and Uncle Lloyd hosted Thanksgiving dinners, and then I took over for some years. And then after a while, we started alternating houses between our place and Larry and Kathy's until we started all having grandkids. Those annual Thanksgiving dinners helped to bond our two families and leave me with a lot of happy memories, which also include our cousin Valerie. One year, the second cousins realized, oh, there's wine and beer here. And they really bonded as second cousins that year. We all have our Larry stories, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of them. Kathy, thank you for being a wonderful wife to Larry, and I'm so glad you're my cousin. I'd like to end with a quote that's actually from Jack Lemmon. Death ends a life, but not a relationship.
Hi, I'm Valerie. Larry was my first cousin. Our fathers were brothers. Larry and I were close since we were small children, and to me, he was a brother. I know many of you knew Larry as an adult, so I'd like to share a memory of when he was just a small child. As you know, Larry was very curious, adventuresome, and fun-loving. And because of this, as a child, he was always in trouble with his parents. No, that's okay, thanks. Always in trouble with his parents, especially his mom. I can still envision her scolding him for some type of mischief he was in, which was often. Anyway, I remember a visit that he and his family made to my family's home in Connecticut when Larry was about 7. Shortly after they arrived, Larry just disappeared. No one could find him. A few minutes later, there were some strange noises coming from the kitchen. So everyone went to investigate. Now, this kitchen in my home in Connecticut had, as part of the cabinetry in the house, a built-in carousel, which housed large pots and pans. So it's the kitchen cabinet that spun around inside. So as we were all investigating this noise coming from the kitchen, suddenly the cabinet door popped open, flew open, and out pops Larry with a grin from ear to ear with his buzz cut, and he's 7 years old. And he had been taking a ride in the kitchen cabinet. So it was something we never forgot, and we laughed about it many times over the years. But to him, it was just an amusement park ride, not a kitchen cabinet. How he found it in 3 minutes being in the house, we never really knew. But he had fun with it. I mean, I lived in this house, and I never thought of doing such a thing. But that was Larry. And the story does show that his curiosity and sense of adventure started as a child and remained throughout his life. It's part of what made him the person we all loved so much.
Hello, my name is Ernie Coachman. I'm Larry's cousin. My mother was Aunt Chris's sister. Little background on our family. Unfortunately, we didn't have the closeness that Larry's other side of the family had. At a few points, my aunt and my mother were estranged. So through our childhood, Uncle Lloyd was in the Air Force, as some of you may know. So Chris and Larry would come visit and stay with us from time to time. There's 5 years difference between Larry and I. So it was kind of cool to have an older guy come stay with you. And it wasn't always good things that he would teach me and show me. One thing in particular I remember, he came out of the bathroom one day, and he said, Ernie, you have to come in here and look. You know what? He wanted me to come into the bathroom and look at something that he had done in there. And he asked me, and it was, but he said, "Isn't that the biggest you've ever seen?" And I guess it was, you know. I mean, I did look at mine after that quite often just to say that. But I have a few memories of Larry growing up before I was 7 years old. The reason why I remember these stories because he and Aunt Chris would come and visit. We would do different things. He was always into sci-fi things. Me, not so much. When the movie 2001: Space Odyssey came out, he had to see it. And we live in Columbus, Ohio at the time. He had to see that movie. I was not interested. I remember my aunt, my mother, Larry, and I went to the theater, and I was just bored to tears. Watching this movie, I was just not interested at all, and he just thought it was the greatest. And as someone mentioned earlier, we did sit and watch all the credits after the movie was done. But another memory of mine, when Aunt Chris and Uncle Lloyd were living in Arlington, they were in a high-rise condo or apartment. Do you all remember when they lived in a high-rise? But Larry and I were running around, and I can't remember how old I was at the time. I was probably maybe around 8 to 10 years old. Larry talked me into, we went into the laundry room. Larry talked me into getting into one of the dryers. And I feel very fortunate that he didn't have a dime with him. Because I'm sure I would have been tumbling in there until someone came along. But I have a few Larry stories. Maybe I can join in later when other people are sharing the stories. But I really miss Larry. I feel fortunate that I was able to come and say goodbye to him before he left us.
And you guys don't know me, but guess which one Larry was, and guess which one I was of the Odd Couple. If you're saying Larry was Felix, you're right. Okay. The story I've got to tell has to do with the class that we took together, although I didn't see Larry during this class. It was a practicum at JMU. By the way, JMU was called Madison College back then. Okay. It was at WVPT, and we had to go in and do whatever the technician told us to do, which involved getting tapes ready, getting the cameras ready to fade from 1 to 2, that kind of thing. And the technician that particular day wasn't real big on this program. He said, you guys should have a textbook, and I don't think we should have to teach you this much, and I'm just not real big on this. And I thought, okay, outspoken, aren't you? He says, but there is one exception. There is one of you that I don't feel that way about. His name's Larry Aronson, and when he comes in, I don't have to do a thing. He just says, shall I get started? The guy said, yeah. He says, okay. And he does everything without any direction at all. Completely from beginning to end. The rest of us had to be walked through it. So
I got to tell you, Larry was known for his creativity. I didn't even know him at that point. I met him later, and I said, hey, I've heard about you. And Kathy, that's the story.
Some of you know that Larry enjoyed cowboy shows. He really liked cowboy shows a lot, and he would sit and watch them. He has a routine on Saturday to watch the old cowboy shows, Paladin and How the Gun Will Travel, all that. Well, I think that's the same thing. And one of the shows, or one of the ones he used to watch as a child, was the Roy Rogers show. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. If you're of the age, you'll know that song, and you know that show. And the theme song for that show is fitting into this part of our celebration of Larry's life. And if you know the song, please sing along. It's called Happy Trails. Sisters are going to sing along, and I know some of you know this, and I know some of you young people know it too. Okay, you ready? Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling on till then. Happy trails to you until we meet again. Richard?
Hi, I'm Richard. I've got 1,000 Larry stories. 1,000. But I'm not going to tell them all now. You just run through a few things. I taught for like 30 some years, and I would tell my children Larry stories, and they just absolutely loved them. And they wrote letters to him, and sometimes he would come in and talk to them. He'd show them how to make cartoons, and that's kind of where I met Larry. I met Larry in 7th grade, Mrs. Caston's art class at Kenmore Junior High School. He had talked the teacher into letting him teach the class how to make animated cartoons, and where you'd make a drawing on a file card and do one underneath it, and then you'd flip them and you'd have this little cartoon. And I was worried when he would come around, because he was in charge of the whole thing, so he was coming around and he was going to look at my drawings, and my drawing level, artistic ability was like on a preschool level. But when he saw mine, he just, whoa, that is great! And I just couldn't believe it, that he would think that way. And his mom met my mom, and we got together, and we became best friends. And we stayed best friends. I probably saw him every day from 7th, 8th grade up and through college. And while we were doing these stories, I just wrote a few of the things that we were involved in back then. We would just do stuff every day. It was packed. As soon as we got up to when we went to bed. And sometimes we'd spend the night together. And I would tell my children this, my kids at school, because they always seem to be bored. I said, how can you ever be bored? This is how to live your life. And Larry really knew how to live. Every day started with high hopes and with joy. We learned, I could see his house from mine, and Ernie, that high rise was like 3 stories. And we could see flashlights so we learned Morse code. I had an old Boy Scout manual, and we learned Morse code, and we're flashing each other. It's like the first text messaging. Of course, it took like 3 hours. Hello, Larry. We gave that up pretty quick. We made marble mazes. We started with cardboard and made little boxes. We start with a little marble and see how long we could make it. Go down this track, it'd fall down, go through a box, make it work from one end of the wall all the way down to the other. He had his movie business, Larry Aronson's movie business, where he'd make cartoons. We'd put them on 8 millimeters, and you'd show them, and it actually looked like a cartoon. When I got to know him, it was Larry Aronson's movie business, which was Lamb, Lamb, and Rat 2. That's Richard Andrews 2. We eventually became LARA Productions, where we made a full-length movie, Leadfinger. We were both into James Bond, and we had animated everything, and it was amazing. We wrote TV commercials and did double track, triple track, made all kinds of sounds. One of our greatest things is, this only happened once, and if you know anybody that's done this, let me know. But we found out if you hit a fly with a fly swatter, it would kind of lay there dormant for a while, and then it would come back alive. So we decided, well, what if we tied a little thread around it while it had its downtime? And then when it woke up again, it would take off, and we had the thread. We have like flies at the end of a string. God knows, I don't know how we figured this stuff out. We would take the bus into D.C. and catch the bus, which came right down the street, and for 25 cents you could play pinball machines, 5 replays. Games, and more games. Every game we ever played, we made another attachment that went along with it. Larry was very into rules, and we had to know you did anything wrong, and he'd say, penalized! If the dice went off the table, penalized! Oh, man. We'd hear the train whistle, and we'd run down and squish pennies on the railroad track. I had a paper route, and for no reason at all, he'd show up at 4:30 in the morning, this is the Post, and want to help me with the papers. I never got over that one, just to do it. I had to work 2 hours every Saturday and Sunday for my dad, just carting around stuff. He'd show up, he'd want to paint, and he never did hard work before, but he did it. He was there, so I could get off early and we could go do more stuff. In 8th grade, we did a science fair project. It was called Satire on Science, and it was a cartoon. The science teacher said, well, we got to change that name. So they changed it to Proving Fundamental Principles of Physics Through Photography. And it was a cartoon, so it really wasn't a science project, but we thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But we won honorable mention. So Larry was an award-winning filmographer at the his mom, I don't know. We'd do stuff, and I know that she knew what we were doing, but she never could quite figure it out. Like, we would take every blanket in his house, and his living room and dining room would be under blankets, and we'd make these mazes, and we'd go all through it, it'd be pitch black. Or we'd set up his train sets, and it would go massive train sets, layouts. Or we'd fill up every glass in his house and play them, like make 3 octaves and play him the music. And we knew he had to get it all cleaned up for his mom to get home. And she always kind of expected something. She knew something was up, but she never really knew what was going on. But she'd say, Larry, you straighten up or we're sending you to boarding school. And Richard, you're going too. And then one day out of the blue, he comes up and says, we're in high school, he says, hey, let's be dentists. I said, yeah, okay. I didn't question it, so okay. So he went to Old Dominion College back then, and we were going to be dentists. Hey, we could start a practice and have our train layout in the lobby. We went to college, and it just overwhelmed us. He wasn't near his parents. There were girls there. It was wild. We never even had a beer before we went to college, and it was crazy. We acted like idiots. We did some stupid things, and within a semester, we were on our way back home. When I got home, my draft number was high enough. There was a war going on, so I went into the Air Force, and they sent me to the war zone. Larry kind of resolved it with his parents. They're the ones that told him that maybe a dentist was better than filmmaking, because filmmaking is going out of style, and nobody does that anymore. But Larry talked to him, and they eventually sent him to James Madison, where he got his media degrees. And when I got out of the service and he got done, we kind of hit up again, and we did the normal things, the families, and we did some things. And I want to fast forward 45 years up into the future. And he said, come up with another great idea. He says, hey, let's walk across America. I never questioned it. I said, okay, yeah, when do we leave? I love Larry. There's nobody like him. His powers of kindness and encouragement, he make me a better person, he make me a better teacher and a better parent. Every day was looked forward to with high hopes and great joy. Sometime in college, probably Mr. Foljam's English 101 class, he wrote a poem. And I was thinking about all this, and the poem kind of is appropriate. He kind of wrote it for us here, right today. What is life if joy abundant is missing from the finished picture, that one may have, yet not have, and so one learns the answer, that there's happiness in companionship. And as I gaze out into the blazing inferno of this age, I see your face, and now I rest, contented.